time. Actually, I've been doing these companies for about 40 plus years. And I know for some members of the audience, that's going to elicit one of those, that's older than me. But it's okay. You'll get here eventually, and you can look back and go, yeah, I did that for 40 years. So I run a company called ConnectAndSell. It's not especially relevant to what I want to talk about, except for one thing. So our whole mission in life is to deliver lots of conversations compared to any other way you can get conversations to sales reps. But what I want to talk about today isn't really about delivering conversations to sales reps for its standard purpose. I'm going to try to connect some dots that I think are unusual to connect. So I want to see whether I can connect the following 4 things. One is conversations that you have by outreach on the phone. Think of it as cold calls and follow-up calls, stuff to reschedule meetings, but they're conversations that you have, synchronous conversations with live human beings. I know conversations is a term that's gotten kind of spread out to mean lots of different things. So I'm meaning by this that one person and another person are actually talking with each other synchronously live, right? So that's one thing I want to connect. Another thing I want to connect is the whole world of digital interaction. So what happens when you reach out through email? What happens when you reach out through social? What happens when you do that first, and what happens when you do that after a conversation? So I'm going to see if I can hook that up. Third is the notion of trust in the world of B2B. And this may sound like it's a little far afield, but I think it's essential to the entire project, so to speak, of market dominance, and at the very least, selling to make the quarter. And then finally, I'm going to actually try to attach this to another feature of demand gen, which is advertising. And let's see whether I can pull it off. If I do, I'll be very happy. If not, it was a go. So here's where I'm going to start. In the world of B2B, the buyer is very special. So the business to consumer buyer, you or me out buying a whatever, buying a watch, buying an iPhone, buying a Tesla, we're putting our money at risk. But the business buyer is putting their career at risk. And that's a big deal because you can always make up money. I buy a Tesla, I find out I'm allergic to electricity, it kind of gives me an itch in a bad place. And my doctor says, you got to dump the Tesla. Well, maybe I'm out $5,000, $10,000, but I can make it up over time. I buy the equivalent $72,000 system in terms of price for my company. Doesn't matter what my title is. If it doesn't work, if people hate it, if it doesn't integrate, if it doesn't solve the business problem, I've hurt my career. And my career is worth more to me in general as a buyer than my cash. I can make up the cash. It's hard to fix your reputation as the person who ruined a company with a bad purchase. So the winner in B2B pursuits among all of the various players that are contending for the attention of the buyer, the winner is normally no decision. And why is that? Because none of the sellers manage to get to the point where the buyer trusts them sufficiently to make a decision. So I'm going to start with trust, actually, and work my way backward. So if we want to succeed in marketplaces, we want to dominate them, that's the safe place to be as a company, or we just want to make the quarter, at some point, we've got to get B2B buyers to actually trust us. Now, there are people in marketing who will tell us that B2B buyers will trust a brand. I can assure you, nobody trusts a brand enough to sacrifice their career based on brand alone. So brand will help them in feeling comfortable with the decision that they make, but the decision will be made based on trusting one of the sellers, one of the individual human beings that they're talking with to be 2 things. One, on their side. That's something that, by the way, bots can't quite do. You can interact with a bot, you can learn from a bot, tremendous efficiencies can be had from a bot. A little bit hard to, as a human being, to say, that bot's got my back. I'm pretty sure it's on my side. If it's my bot, sure. And maybe that's the ultimate solution. But if it's the vendor's bot, I don't know if I'm going to throw my career trust all the way to that bot. Oddly enough, we do it all the time with human beings. We're not quite sure why we do it, but information goes back and forth between us and another human being. And at some point, we find ourselves trusting them more than others. And at some point, We might even trust them like we trust a surgeon who's going to operate on us, right? We trust a surgeon with our life. Okay, that's one level above our career for some of us. For some, it might be the flip. But we've got to get to the point of not just knowing the surgeon is competent. We have to believe they're on our side. That's why doctors take that Hippocratic oath. Do no harm, right? First, do no harm. Well, that's how they're saying in advance, I don't intend to harm you. I'm going to use my skills for you. There's no Hippocratic oath for sellers. You kind of have to take one yourself if you're selling. So getting to trust is really important. So now we have a question of how. If it's really important and we got to get there, if most of the time we lose to no decision because of no trust, all of our demand gen efforts go wasted because we generate the demand, we bring the parties to the table, and then they leave the table thinking, yeah, not quite. I don't feel good enough to transact. And so we'll call that a down funnel problem. But where does it need to be addressed? It actually needs to be addressed in the very first interaction. So back a few years ago, I was lucky enough to be at a dinner with Chris Voss, the author of Never Split the Difference, How to Negotiate as If Your Life Depends on It. I probably butchered the second part of the title, but forgive me, Chris. And I had the opportunity to ask him a key question. Since Connect and Sell, we provide the ability of folks to do lots and lots of cold calls, follow-up calls, and so forth. I asked him a cold call question. How long do we have in a cold call to get trust? And the answer he gave me was instantaneous. He said 7 seconds. I was like, I was asking like after N minutes, when are we screwed and we can't get trust? He said 7 seconds. That seemed really short to me. I joked with him and I said, our research says 8 seconds. And he said, your research is wrong. It's 7 seconds. So I figured, okay, I'm talking to an expert here. So I wonder if he'll give me some advice. So I asked him, well, what do we have to do in those 7 seconds? And he said, simple. All we have to do is show the other person we see the world through their eyes. We call it tactical empathy. And then we need to demonstrate to that person that we are competent to solve a problem they have right now. And I thought for a second, I said, well, isn't the problem they have right now me? I just ambushed him. And he said, bingo. That's why you can never lose in a cold call. You can always get trust because you can solve the problem that is you by offering to go away in exchange for something. What do you want? You want to say something to them. That's a very simple negotiation. You'll come away with trust every time, as long as the setup is that you're going to be accountable for being the bad thing. You are the invisible stranger. Invisible strangers are the worst thing in human history and prehistory for that matter. And so you got to be accountable for that. So I said, well, we teach people to say, I know I'm an interruption. I have 27 seconds to tell you why I called. And he said, perfect. Because you threw yourself under the bus before they could throw you under the bus. You weren't quiet about it. You were very direct. You were very hard in your voice when you said, I know I'm an interruption. And then you went playful, curious. Your voice went up a couple of times. And it was a come along with me voice, but you offered to solve a problem competently that they have, which is you. They listened to you for 27 seconds and they achieved their goal, which is to get off this call with their self-image intact. Now, how does that relate to trust? Well, you get trust every time. So if you can get trust in 7 seconds, then you have a chance of nurturing that trust over time to get to the point where that buyer or that prospective buyer trusts you more than they trust themselves, because that's the threshold for action in B2B. The call to action is come talk with us. The threshold for action at every stage of the process is for what they're about to give up, which is their time and eventually somebody's money, not theirs. So it's career risk. They got to trust you more than they trust themselves at every stage along the way. So that comes to a third factor. And I got to look at my time here to make sure, we're on a strict clock, right? So here we are on the time. I got a lot more time left. All right. So those two dots I think are connected. The dot of trust required for a B2B transaction to take place and the threshold. One buyer trusted more than the seller one seller trusted more than the buyer trusts themselves. And then trust started in 7 seconds in a cold call, a very unlikely place for most people to think trust can be found. Now, in the world of sales, you find a fair number of people who resonate with this, especially people who do lots of cold calling. In the world of marketing, you find pretty much nobody who resonates with this because it just doesn't feel right. That is, it doesn't feel like ambushing somebody is a good setup for trust. It actually is, but it requires skill. And that skill comes about a couple of ways. One is, I'll call it inherited skill. You need a script that helps you. Why? Because you're not going to make up the right words in the right tone yourself in order to optimize that emotional interaction with somebody when you ambush them. It's just not going to happen. And secondly, you've got to have, so it's got to be kind of a crafted script, and then you've got to practice it and believe in something. And what do you need to believe in? You need to believe in the value of your product. Interestingly enough, in a cold call or a follow-up call before a discovery meeting, the product is the discovery meeting. That's the call to action is, let's have a discussion. Let's have an exploration. Let's find out if it makes sense to go even one step further. So a discovery meeting is an opportunity to discover possibilities. By the way, it's not primarily an opportunity for a salesperson to discover an opportunity to get a commission. That's a side effect of a discovery meeting that might occur. The real purpose is to find out if there's reason to move forward. Well, if you're the expert, and the seller is always the expert, then the idea is to actually put forward to somebody some things about what it is that you are experts on. After all, you are the expert. That will be of value to that person, even if they never move forward with you, even if they never move forward with your company. That's what you're selling. That belief in the value of that meeting for that human being you're speaking with, even if you're never going to do any business with them, that belief is the key to getting the sincerity into your voice to go along with anything that's scripted. So script's got to be practiced with coaching to the point where it's natural, and it's got to be supported by an underlying belief that allows you to be sincere in your voice. Most of the information that's going into a person who's on the receiving end, in this case, in this part of demand gen, most of that information is going in as emotional information. So here's a comparison, and bear with me, I like numbers. So an email contains, roughly speaking, 5,000 bits of information. That's in the text of the email. Say 10 bits per letter or number. It's really about 8, but let's say 10. And you multiply that out by something on the order of 500 characters, which is about 100 words, and you get yourself about 5,000 bits of information. The human voice carries 20,000 bits of information per second. That's 4 emails every single second. So in those 7 seconds that you have, in order to get somebody to trust you, you're actually putting 28 emails worth of data into their midbrain. And it's their midbrain that counts. Their midbrain is where the emotions are processed that allow a person to make a decision. Am I going to move forward? Am I going to not move forward? Am I going to trust this person or not? These decisions are made, generally speaking, without our conscious awareness. So when we're speaking with somebody, we have a 20,000 bit per second pipeline right into the part of their brain that makes decisions, especially important ones like, do I keep talking with you? So that's pretty amazing and very hard to achieve any other way. You can do it face to face, but how many of your buyers are sitting face to face with you at any given moment? You can do it with the human voice right through the ears into the center of the brain. By the way, most people probably don't know this. There's no reason to know it. When you're anesthetized, if you're put out for a surgery by an anesthesiologist, your ears are still connected to the center of your brain. That is, the anesthetized patient can still hear what's going on. They just aren't aware that they can hear what's going on. So it's still influencing them. Whereas somebody who's reading, well, it's hard to be anesthetized and be reading an email at the same time. That one doesn't work. So the brain paths that support decision-making actually are still open, even when an anesthetic is applied and you are, quote unquote, out. So that's actually why trust can be formed this quickly. So now what? Well, now you've spoken with somebody and maybe you get some trust. It's a long-term affair for a simple reason. When you look at a market, a B2B market consists of folks who have a need for your offering. They will reference each other. If one buys, then it serves as a means for the others to buy with less risk, and therefore you will go through your market, so to speak, with ever increasing speed. You sell more, you get more when you're in a market, and it lowers the risk and it lowers the cost of the next transaction. Not the price, but the cost to the buyer. So, okay, so that's great. You have a market, right? Well, what are you going to do within that market based on what we now know about talking to people and getting trust? Well, one thing we want to do is get meetings. Okay, so that's sales. I would say the standard demand gen path, we say, ends in a meeting, and this is a form of demand gen that's pretty direct. It's you make a list, you talk to people on the list. At ConnectAndSell, we're real fond of letting you talk to 10 times as many people, but you can talk to fewer people. It's just you got to talk to them. But what else happens in that market? And this is what's interesting. So here's something obvious. When you talk to somebody, they're probably going to your website. So you have a list of folks who are targeted, they're in your market, and you speak to one of them, and you're thinking, as a salesperson, it's all about getting the meeting. And if I can't get the meeting now, I need to get it in one of the 11 future quarters in which the company of the person I'm talking to might consider our product. The replacement cycle for B2B products is about 3 years on average. That's 12 quarters. The consideration period for B2B products is about 1 quarter. So when you're talking to somebody who's perfectly in your market, there's only a 1/12th chance, 1 over 12, that they're in your market right now, that they're in market. 11/12ths of the time, they're in the future. So you're going to need to nurture that relationship. So now, can you nurture that relationship with digital content and digital interactions? Absolutely. Is it easier or harder to do that after a conversation? Vastly easier. There's a 14 times more likely chance that somebody will open and interact with an email you send them immediately following a conversation because they know you're real, they know you're human, and they kind of feel a little bit obligated to you, oddly enough, even if it's a negative outcome, even if they hang up on you. So send them an email that says, thank you for our conversation today. The ultimate subject line, it's not a trick, it's a fact. And the odds of them opening that email are very, very high, and of interacting with it are very high. So you now have the simplest of digital channels opened by a conversation and amplified by a conversation. So that little one too, talk to somebody, send them an email, is incredibly powerful. By the way, the other way around, which is I would call it the standard way, is anti-powerful. Send somebody an email and have this conversation with them. Hey, did you get my email? Did you read it? There's only 2 answers. They're both bad. There's no good answer to that. I got your email and I didn't read it is a bad answer. I didn't bother with your email is a bad answer. There's no good answer. So the optimum order to use to get digital interactions and conversations to work well together is have a conversation first and then send the email. Okay, that's pretty simple. Is it the same with social outreach? Absolutely. You have a conversation with somebody, you send them a LinkedIn invitation. Often folks say either send some sort of note with it, some sort of message, preferably not the kind that I get that are pitching me, or just send the invitation. Well, this is an opportunity to have a message that's pretty simple. Here's the message. Person's name. Thank you for our conversation today. I always appreciate it when somebody picks up and spends a few seconds with me. Boom. So now you have a LinkedIn invitation that is not weird. It's naturally personalized because it's personalized to the situation. You spoke with them. Now, here's the weird one. They go to your website. Well, who's going to your website? Folks that you targeted. So one of the hardest things in the world of demand gen is to get the right people to come to your website. When your advertising or your demand gen activities are broad, you tend to get the wrong people. When they're tight, you're resonating with the right people, but you're not getting enough of the right people. So here's a way of driving additional folks to your website where you've done a lot of work, where your CTA is right there for them. And it's in the context of somebody bothering to reach out to them. By the way, very few of us in senior positions get very many phone calls. It's a conceit that folks have that they get called all the time. If you get called 3 times a day, that's a lot. If you get 600 emails a day, that's a few. So it's very, very different and very asymmetric. So now you've achieved something very strange that folks don't think about. A cold call or follow-up call, but a cold call of all things, being a form of effective targeted digital advertising. So when you're thinking about, hey, what do I get in terms of bang for my buck? Well, let's review the bidding. I get a conversation that gives me an opportunity to have follow-up conversations with somebody that I know answers the phone. And by the way, phone answers answer the phone about 1 in 7 times. Phone non-answers answer the phone about 1 in 30 times. There's a big gap in between. Knowing that somebody answers the phone is really good if you're going to be using the human voice in order to engender trust and move down the path toward curiosity and then a meeting, a discovery meeting, and maybe actually transacting together. So number one, I have a chance of setting a meeting. Number two, I've reduced the cost and the effort required in order to have future human, live, synchronous conversations. Number three, I have a relationship with somebody in which I can send an email that they're likely to open and interact with. Number four, I can send a social message to either talk to somebody that I'm already connected with, or much more likely in a cold call, to invite somebody to connect with me, probably on LinkedIn. And then number five, and the big surprise, something I try to get from my AdWords budget, from my LinkedIn ads, from everything else that I'm doing is, hey, I get a website visitor almost every time. And I know that they're highly targeted because they came from our list. So with that, I'm going to wrap up because everybody always likes it if we can finish a little bit early. And if you have any questions, put them up in the chat. And if you're tired from a long day of listening, well, have a wonderful evening.